My name is Madison Clark. I'm 21, a junior at Northeastern University in Boston, majoring in economics. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, then you already know my story better than you think. And if stories about favoritism, betrayal, and finding your own strength speak to you, please hit subscribe, like, and share, because that's what keeps me going and gives me the courage to keep telling the truth. It was the middle of July when I steered my old Honda Civic off the Mass Pike and into the quiet suburban streets of Worcester, Massachusetts. I hadn't been home since spring break, but the neighborhood looked exactly the same. Kids chasing each other through sprinklers, the scent of fresh-cut grass lingering in the warm air, and houses that all seemed frozen in time. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I spotted Mom on the porch already waving with both hands, like I'd been gone for years instead of a few months. Her enthusiasm was almost theatrical, arms flung wide, voice high and sugary. "Madison, honey, you're finally here!" She rushed toward me before I even had the chance to grab my duffel bag from the back seat. Her hug was tight, almost smothering, the kind you can't quite escape. Dad followed behind her, slower, with his usual awkward pat on my shoulder. It wasn't unkind, it just always felt like he was checking a box, like affection was something he had to remember rather than something he wanted to give. I forced a smile. "Hi, Dad." "Hey, kiddo. Long drive?" he asked, already turning to help me with my bag, though he clearly wanted to go back inside where the air conditioning was running. "An hour and some change," I said, though what I really wanted to add was longer than you probably care to notice. Mom looped her arm through mine as if I might run away otherwise. "You came at the perfect time. Dinner's almost ready." Her eyes sparkled in that way they did whenever she had a surprise to share. "And guess who's coming over?" I didn't need to guess. Still, I asked, playing along. "Who?" "Your sister and Ethan. Isn't that wonderful?" "Of course, Samantha. My older sister. The golden one. The one whose shadow I'd been stuck in my entire life." I swallowed the sigh that threatened to escape and nodded instead. "Yeah, wonderful." As we stepped inside, the familiar smell of Mom's lemon cleaner and Dad's aftershave hit me all at once. The living room looked just as I remembered, except cleaner, like Mom had been polishing every surface just in case Samantha walked through the door. The lace-trimmed tablecloth was already spread across the dining table, one she only brought out for special occasions. Funny how my coming home after a grueling semester never counted as one. Mom bustled back into the kitchen, humming under her breath. Dad retreated to the den, muttering something about checking on the Red Sox game, and I stood there in the entryway for a moment, taking it all in, the familiar ache settling in my chest. It's strange how you can step back into the same house you grew up in, but feel like a guest the second you cross the threshold. I wandered upstairs to drop my bag in my old bedroom. Everything was the same, posters curling at the edges, the glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa had helped me stick on the ceiling when I was little, still clinging stubbornly to the paint. For a second, I let myself lie back on the bed and stare up at them, pretending I was 10 years old again, before Samantha's achievements turned me into background noise. From downstairs, Mom's voice floated up. "Madison, wash up. Dinner will be ready any minute." I sat up slowly, pressing my palms against the comforter. This was supposed to be a break, a time to relax, recharge before another semester of classes and part-time shifts at the cafe. But deep down, I already knew how tonight would go. Mom's over-the-top praise for Samantha, Dad's proud smiles whenever she opened her mouth, and me, sitting there with my fork poised in silence, trying not to choke on my own invisibility. Still, I pushed myself off the bed, no point delaying the inevitable. I headed downstairs, plastered on a polite smile, and braced myself for the familiar family performance. And right on cue, the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang just as I reached the bottom of the stairs. Mom practically sprinted to open it, smoothing her blouse like she was welcoming royalty. And in a way, she was, at least to her. "Sam! Ethan!" she squealed, pulling my sister and her husband into the house with a hug that looked more like a red carpet welcome than a family visit. Victoria, though everyone called her Sam, stepped inside like she owned the place. Her hair was perfectly styled, nails manicured, Even her perfume carried the kind of confidence that made people lean in. Ethan trailed behind, balancing a bottle of wine in one hand and a box of pastries in the other. "Thought we'd bring dessert," he said with that easy grin that made him seem more likable than he deserved. Dad came out of the den at the sound of their voices, smiling wider than I'd seen him smile in months. "There's my successful girl," he said, pulling Sam into a proud embrace. I stood by the staircase, watching the scene play out like a guest who had wandered into the wrong home. When Mom finally noticed me, she gave a quick wave. "Madison, come help set the table." Of course. We gathered around the dining room table soon after. Mom had gone all out. Her best dishes, the lace-trimmed tablecloth, candles flickering even though it was still bright outside. The smell of roast chicken filled the air. I sat across from Sam, who already looked like she had something planned. Halfway through dinner, she set down her fork with a flourish, her voice rising above the clinking of cutlery. "So, Ethan and I have been talking." She paused just long enough for all eyes to lock on her. "We think it's time for a family trip to Hawaii this Christmas." Mom gasped, clapping her hands like a little girl. "Oh, that would be wonderful. Can you imagine Christmas in Honolulu?" Dad chuckled, shaking his head in admiration. "What a fantastic idea, sweetheart." I froze, my fork hovering midair. Hawaii? At Christmas? My brain immediately started doing the math. Flights, hotels, food, thousands of dollars. Way more than my savings account had ever seen. Sam's eyes slid to me, that familiar smirk tugging at her lips. "What do you think, Mads? Think you can swing it? Or should Big Sister spot you this time?" Heat rushed to my cheeks. I clenched my napkin under the table. "I can manage my own expenses, thanks." Her eyebrow arched. "Are you sure? We're looking at about $3,000 per person. Flights, resort, the works. It's not exactly budget travel." I nearly choked on my water. $3,000? That was months of my cafe shifts, tutoring gigs, and barely their savings. But I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me squirm. "I said I'll manage," I repeated, steadying my voice even as my stomach tightened. She shrugged, turning her attention back to Ethan. "Well, anyway, the restaurant's doing incredible. We just hired a sous chef from Milan. Real authentic Italian talent. People are lining up out the door." Mom leaned forward, practically glowing. "You're so entrepreneurial, Sam. Madison, you should take notes from your sister. That's real business sense." I stabbed at my green beans. "Right," Sam added sweetly. "Hey, maybe you could even work for us one day. We're always looking for reliable staff." The table erupted in laughter, except me. I pressed my lips together, staring at my plate, feeling myself shrink smaller and smaller under the weight of their pride for her and their dismissal of me. For a moment, I was 10 years old again, sitting at this very table, invisible while everyone else cheered for Samantha's latest victory. Some things never changed. I forced a bite of chicken down my throat, swallowing hard. If I had to live on instant noodles for 6 months just to prove her wrong, so be it. I wouldn't take her charity. The conversation drifted back to wine imports, new restaurant menus, and Sam's holiday vision of white sand beaches. My voice wasn't needed, my opinion wasn't missed. All I could do was sit there in the candlelight, smiling tightly while my family built castles around Samantha's dreams and left me stranded outside their walls. And as Mom poured another glass of wine for Sam, I realized with a sinking heart that this family trip wasn't really about family at all. It was about Sam, as it always had been. The laughter from Samantha's "maybe Madison could work for us one day" still echoed around the table when Mom leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, eyes shining at my sister like she was gazing at a celebrity. "Sam, tell us more about the restaurant," Mom urged. "I still can't believe how quickly you and Ethan built it up. Your grandfather would be so proud." Samantha dabbed her lips with her napkin like a performer pausing for dramatic effect. "Well," she began, her tone dripping with satisfaction, "La Casa Vita has been booked solid since last month. We just signed a deal with a local paper for a feature. And with Marco, our new sous chef from Milan, the menu practically sells itself." Dad whistled under his breath. shaking his head with admiration. "That's my girl. Always knew you had that entrepreneurial spark. Remember when you won that high school business fair? We said then you were going places." His eyes softened, the corners crinkling with pride. Not at me. Never at me, but at her. I forced a smile, swirling peas around my plate. "Funny, Dad. You never even came to my debate finals, but sure. Let's reminisce about Sam's glory days." Mom chimed in again, her voice syrupy sweet. "You know, Madison, you could learn a lot from your sister. She has such a head for business. Maybe you should take notes. Economics is nice, but experience is what really matters." The comment landed like a slap. I pressed my fork harder into the plate, grounding myself before the words bubbling in my throat spilled out. "I'm doing fine in school, Mom. Dean's List again this semester." But the moment hung in the air only briefly before Samantha laughed lightly, waving her hand as though brushing away an irrelevant detail. "Grades are cute, Maddie, but in the real world, it's about results. Clients. Cash flow. You can't put straight A's in the bank." Ethan chuckled, raising his glass toward her. "She's right. Running a restaurant isn't like passing exams. It's a 24/7 hustle." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted iron. Cute. That's all my hard work was to them. Cute. Dad turned his gaze back to me at last, as if remembering I was at the table. "Still working that cafe job, kiddo?" His tone was casual, almost dismissive, like he already knew the answer and wasn't impressed. "Yes," I said evenly. "Pays the bills." Sam tilted her head, sympathy curling at the edges of her smirk. "Well, if you ever want a real challenge, we could always use an extra pair of hands at the restaurant. You'd get to watch and learn how actual business works." Her words dangled in the air, half offer, half insult. Mom clapped her hands like it was the most generous thing she'd ever heard. "Isn't that thoughtful? Your sister is giving you an opportunity." My pulse throbbed in my ears. "Thanks," I murmured, though my throat burned. The rest of the meal blurred into a chorus of wine lists, expansion plans, and tales of customers begging for reservations. Every time I tried to join in, mentioning a research project I'd been proud of or a professor who encouraged me, my words were brushed aside, overshadowed by another anecdote about Sam's genius. It was like being on stage with a spotlight fixed permanently on her, while I stumbled in the shadows, unseen. By the time Mom served Ethan's pastries for dessert, my chest felt so tight I could hardly breathe. Samantha leaned back in her chair, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's, her smile radiating victory. And I sat there, silent, swallowing bite after bite of sugar that tasted like ashes in my mouth, knowing no matter how hard I worked, I would never taste the sweetness of their approval. I sat at that dinner table, nodding and smiling in all the right places, but inside, I was somewhere else entirely. My sister's laughter blurred into background noise, my parents' admiration a distant hum. When I feel invisible in this house, my mind always drifts to the only place I ever felt truly seen. Grandpa Walter's porch in Portsmouth. The memory slipped in so vividly it was almost like I'd been transported there. The creak of the old swing, the smell of pine trees drifting in from the woods, the salty bite of the sea not too far away. His house wasn't fancy, paint peeling on the shutters, floorboards groaning under every step. But to me, it felt more like home than my actual home ever did. "Sit down, Maddie," Grandpa would say, patting the worn leather couch in his living room. A tub of mint chocolate chip ice cream already waiting on the coffee table, 2 spoons sticking out like an invitation. "Tonight we're watching Casablanca, again." I'd groan, pretending to be annoyed, but truthfully, I loved it. Halfway through, he'd pause the movie, look at me with those sharp blue eyes, and say something that stuck forever. "You know what's great about this film, kiddo? It's not the obvious hero that makes it matter. It's the quiet one, the one who does the right thing even when nobody's clapping." I'd clutch my spoon, nodding like I understood, though I was only 12 at the time. Now, years later, I think about those words more often than I care to admit. Other days, we'd be out on the lake behind his house. He'd row us into the middle, the oars dipping and gliding while sunlight bounced off the water like 1,000 little diamonds. He'd hand me the fishing rod, showing me how to bait the hook without flinching. "The trick is patience," he'd say, adjusting my grip. "The best catches aren't always the ones thrashing around at the surface. Sometimes it's the quiet ones swimming deep, waiting for someone willing to notice them." I can still picture myself sitting there, legs dangling over the side of the boat, watching the ripples spread. For the first time in my life, I felt like maybe being the quiet one wasn't such a curse. Maybe it meant I could be something different, something real. And then there were the small rituals only we shared. Playing poker with M&Ms as chips, sneaking pepperoni pizza even though Mom hated the grease, letting me stay up late to watch Roman Holiday for the 10th time. "I bought those cookies you like," he'd announce, as if it was the highlight of his week. To me, it probably was. He never made me compete with Samantha. He never measured my worth against hers. With him, I wasn't the backup daughter. I was just Madison. Enough, exactly as I was. The memory softened the sharp sting of the present, though not entirely. Sitting at my parents' table, I glanced at the empty chair at the far end. Grandpa used to sit there during holidays, leaning back with his whiskey glass, listening to everyone chatter. His eyes always found me, steady and reassuring, like an anchor. Now the chair was just that. Empty wood, no warmth behind it. "Madison?" Mom's voice cut through, pulling me back. "Did you hear what Sam just said about expanding the restaurant? Isn't that inspiring?" I blinked, forcing myself to refocus. "Yeah," I muttered. "Inspiring." But in my mind, I was still on that fishing boat, sunlight glinting on the water, Grandpa's voice reminding me that even the quiet ones have value, and maybe, just maybe, one day I'd believe it too. That night, after dinner, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa Walter once helped me stick up there still faintly shining. The memories of his porch, his stories, his quiet affirmations, those were the only things keeping me from feeling like I'd completely disappeared in my own family. But a few months later, during my freshman year at Northeastern, the one thing I feared most happened. It was October, a crisp morning, the kind where Boston air felt sharp enough to cut. My phone buzzed on my dorm desk just as I was finishing an econ paper. Mom's voice on the other end was broken, barely recognizable. "Madison, honey, Grandpa passed in his sleep last night." The world tilted. My pen slipped from my hand, clattering against the desk. I don't even remember what I said. Maybe nothing. My throat felt sealed shut. I sat frozen while my roommate hovered, unsure what to do, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Grandpa was gone. The only person who ever made me feel like enough, just like that, gone. The funeral in Portsmouth was everything you'd expect for a man like him. Solemn, dignified, attended by neighbors and old colleagues who still spoke of his integrity with reverence. I sat in the front row, clutching tissues I never used, because the tears just wouldn't come. It was too unreal, like if I didn't cry, maybe it wasn't happening. After the burial, we all drove to the attorney's office for the reading of his will. The mood shifted. Not that anyone said it out loud, but you could feel it, that silent tension when money enters the room. We sat in leather chairs around a polished oak table. Mom clutched Dad's hand, her lips pressed in a line. Samantha looked poised, dressed head to toe in black designer clothes that somehow screamed more fashion statement than mourning. Ethan sat beside her, tapping his knee like he was waiting for a deal to close. The attorney, a graying man with round glasses, cleared his throat and began. "To my daughter Deborah," Mom stiffened beside Dad, "I leave the sum of $50,000. Mom exhaled slowly, squeezing Dad's hand. "To my granddaughter Samantha, I leave the sum of $300,000. Samantha's lips curved before she even glanced at Ethan, whispering, "Baby, that's our expansion fund. We can finally start the second location." Her hand rested on his arm, excitement spilling over even in the middle of the reading. The attorney's voice continued, steady and measured. "And to my granddaughter Madison." My stomach tightened. "I leave my home on Maple Street, including its contents and the surrounding property." Silence. For a second, the room was utterly still. Then Samantha burst out laughing, the sound jarring against the hush. "Oh my God, Maddie got the creaky old house? That's hilarious." She dabbed at her eyes, pretending to wipe away tears of laughter. "Don't worry, sis. Maybe you can sell it and buy yourself something nice. Though honestly, who would want that drafty place?" "Sam," Mom scolded weakly, though she was already smiling at her eldest daughter's excitement. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my nails biting into the leather. My house, Grandpa's house, the same porch where we ate pizza, the same couch where we shared ice cream, the same lake where he taught me patience. He hadn't left me scraps. He'd left me himself in the only way he could. But all anyone else saw was a burden, a consolation prize compared to Samantha's windfall. As the attorney closed the folder, Samantha leaned back, triumphant. "Spring wedding, expansion plans, it's all falling into place. Grandpa really knew how to invest in the right people." Her words sliced through me like glass. I stayed quiet, staring down at my lap, but inside I burned with a mix of grief and fury. They could take their money, let them build their empires. What I had was more than capital. It was history, memory, love carved into every board and nail of that house. And though no one else seemed to recognize its worth, I silently promised Grandpa I would. Grandpa's will had barely settled into memory before life moved on, at least for everyone else. Samantha and Ethan wasted no time weaving his generosity into their next big chapter. By the following spring, wedding invitations arrived in thick cream envelopes embossed with gold lettering. "Victoria Clark and Ethan Ross request the honor of your presence." Just holding it made me feel like I'd been handed a ticket to a show where I wasn't the audience, wasn't the cast, just an extra wandering across the stage. The ceremony was at one of Boston's most expensive hotels, chandeliers glittering like icicles overhead, waiters gliding silently with champagne flutes. Mom fussed over Samantha's veil until the last second, whispering about how stunning her daughter looked. Dad beamed so wide his cheeks flushed. I stood among the bridesmaids, stuffed into a dress Samantha had chosen, a pale pink satin number that looked better in theory than reality. My smile felt stitched on. When the music swelled and she walked down the aisle, the entire room sighed in admiration. I couldn't help thinking how much of that admiration was bought with the $300,000 Grandpa had intended to give her a head start, not a head crown. The reception was even grander. White doves released into the twilight, a 5-tier cake taller than me, ice sculptures dripping under the ballroom lights. Samantha and Ethan twirled across the dance floor while guests whispered about their perfect match, their perfect future, their perfect everything. At one point, Mom leaned toward me at the table. "Someday, Madison, you'll have this too," she said with a knowing smile. I wanted to laugh, but all I could manage was a nod. Because deep down, I knew she didn't mean this. Not the lights, the crowd, or the man waiting at the end of the aisle. She meant approval, belonging. And she didn't believe I'd ever get it. Weeks after the honeymoon, news spread fast. Samantha and Ethan had opened their restaurant, La Casa Vita, in Boston's North End. The story was splashed across the local paper. Young entrepreneurs bring authentic Italian cuisine to the city. There was a glossy photo of them standing under the new sign, arms wrapped around each other, grins full of promise. Mom framed that article and hung it in our Worcester living room, right above the mantel where Grandpa's picture used to be. The first time I saw it, I froze in the doorway. Grandpa's steady gaze was gone, replaced by their grinning faces, captured forever in a moment built on his money. It was like erasing him a second time. "Isn't it wonderful?" Mom asked, glancing up at the frame. "Your sister's really doing something big." "Yeah," I murmured. "Wonderful." What I didn't say was that while Samantha was hiring chefs and clinking glasses with food critics, I was hustling between lectures and cafe shifts, barely scraping enough for textbooks. While she expanded her empire, I was counting change in the laundromat. And yet, whenever I came home, the dinner table conversations circled back to her like planets orbiting the sun. How many reservations she'd booked, which investor wanted in, what magazine might feature her next. Every compliment for Samantha felt like a subtraction from me. Every toast to her success, another reminder that my worth was measured not by who I was, but by who I wasn't. One evening, Dad raised his glass, smiling at her across the table. "You've made us so proud, sweetheart. Your grandfather always said you had the spirit of a leader." I pressed my lips together, staring at the condensation on my water glass, fighting the sting in my eyes. Grandpa never said that to me, not once. But he had said other things only I seemed to remember. And as the room filled with clinking glasses and Samantha's laughter, I realized my inheritance wasn't just a house. It was a lifeline, a reminder that I still had a piece of him, even if the rest of my family chose to forget. It wasn't long after the wedding when the subject of Grandpa's house came up. We were back at my parents' dining table in Worcester, another family dinner that felt more like a stage play with the same predictable script. Samantha in the starring role, Mom and Dad, her eager audience, and me, if I was lucky, a background character with one or two lines. I had been crunching numbers all week, running calculations between classes and shifts at the cafe. Property taxes, maintenance costs, utilities. The reality was unavoidable. If I didn't rent out the Portsmouth house, it would bleed me dry. So when Mom asked if I wanted more mashed potatoes, I set down my fork and cleared my throat. Actually, there's something I've been meaning to bring up, about the house. 3 pairs of eyes flicked toward me, but it was the look Samantha shot that made my stomach twist, the kind that always meant trouble. "I've been thinking," I continued, keeping my tone steady. "Since I'm in Boston most of the year, I could rent it out. That way the taxes and upkeep are covered. I found a property management company that—" "You'd rent it to strangers?" Mom's voice sliced through my explanation, laced with disbelief. She set down her wine glass like I'd just suggested burning the place to the ground. "Why wouldn't I?" I asked. "It's practical. I can't afford—" "Oh, honey." She gave me the kind of pitying smile that always made me feel 12 again. "Family doesn't rent to strangers when there are other options." Across the table, Ethan suddenly became fascinated with his potatoes, shoving them around with his fork like he wished he were invisible. Samantha placed her glass down with a deliberate clink. "It actually makes perfect sense," she said smoothly, eyes never leaving mine. "Ethan and I could use the extra space. We're stretched thin with the restaurant, and commuting back and forth to Boston every day is exhausting. The house is sitting there empty, and obviously you wouldn't charge us rent. I mean, come on, it's family." I blinked. "What?" "It's a win-win," she continued, her tone dripping with logic that wasn't logic at all. "We get the space we need, you don't have to worry about the house sitting vacant, and Mom and Dad can rest easy knowing it's all in the family." Mom reached across the table to squeeze her hand, already nodding. "Of course, that would be wonderful. You two deserve the support. And Maddie," she turned back to me, "think about how proud Grandpa would be, knowing the house was helping your sister build her dream." The words hit me like a slap. Helping your sister. As if the house, my inheritance, my one tether to Grandpa, existed only to serve her story. I hadn't exactly planned for—" I started, but Dad cut in, his voice low and firm. "Madison, don't make this difficult. Family comes first." My fork hung suspended over my plate. They were already moving on, the conversation flowing back to wine lists and menu items, as if a decision had been made and my opinion no longer mattered. I sat frozen, the green beans on my plate growing colder by the second. Every cell in my body screamed to protest, to remind them that the house was mine, that Samantha had already inherited more than enough. But I knew how it would play out. Mom sighing about loyalty, Samantha's subtle digs about selfishness, Dad's disappointed glare. So I did what I'd always done. I swallowed it down, forcing another bite past the lump in my throat, and stayed quiet. Inside, though, a storm was building. The night I sat at that dinner table, forced to swallow down my protests about the house, I made myself a quiet promise. If they thought I was too weak to carry my own weight, I'd prove them wrong. Hawaii became my obsession, not because I craved beaches or luau's, but because Samantha had smirked when she said I couldn't afford it, because Mom had looked at me with that pitying tilt of her head, because Dad had muttered about family coming first, and expected me to roll over. So I worked, harder than I ever had before. Mornings started before sunrise at the cafe near campus. I poured lattes for bleary-eyed commuters, smiling even when my hands ached from scrubbing counters. After classes, I hustled to the library where I staffed the circulation desk until closing, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a cruel clock ticking away my youth. Weekends, I picked up tutoring gigs, guiding freshmen through econ basics while silently calculating how many hours of work equaled one more fraction of that $3,000 goal. Every dollar went into a separate savings account labeled Hawaii. I refused to touch it, no matter how tempting it was when my sneakers wore holes or when my friends invited me to dinner downtown. Ramen and peanut butter became my staples. New clothes? Forget it. Every choice was filtered through one question. Would this delay Hawaii? My friends noticed. "You're killing yourself," Lisa, my roommate, said one night as I stumbled in, apron still smelling of coffee and bleach. "It's just a trip." "No," I muttered, collapsing onto my bed. "It's not just a trip. It's proof." She didn't argue. Maybe she saw in my eyes how badly I needed this. By late November, the numbers in my account finally hit the magic mark, $3,000. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my chest tight with pride and exhaustion. I'd done it. Me. Not with handouts, not with pity money, not with Grandpa's inheritance, but with my own 2 hands. The next day, Samantha called. Her voice was sugar-sweet, the kind she used when she thought she was being magnanimous. "Hey, Maddie. Just making sure you've got your share ready. We need to finalize bookings." My throat tightened. She didn't even say please, just assumed. But instead of snapping, I logged into the banking app and transferred the money. My hands shook as I hit send, but when the confirmation appeared, I felt a surge of triumph. "There, done," I said. "Perfect," she replied, already moving on. "I'll let you know details soon." And then she hung up. No thank you. No recognition of what that $3,000 meant to me, just silence on the other end of the line. But I didn't care. For once, I'd kept my word. To celebrate, I let myself buy something small. A blue one-piece swimsuit on sale, simple and unremarkable compared to Samantha's designer bikinis, but to me, it was armor. Proof I belonged on that beach just as much as anyone else. Lisa even lent me her good suitcase, the one with working wheels, because mine had a broken handle I'd been dragging since high school. As I folded the swimsuit into the bag weeks later, anticipation hummed in my veins. December was cold in Boston, the streets gray and salted, but in my mind I could already feel the Hawaiian sun warming my skin. For once, I thought, I wouldn't be the girl left behind. I had no idea how wrong I was. By the time December rolled around, I could practically taste the ocean air. My blue swimsuit sat neatly folded in my borrowed suitcase, waiting. Every shift, every skipped meal, every aching morning had led to this. On December 23rd, I hauled my bag up the familiar steps of my parents' house in Worcester. The cold stung my cheeks, but inside, I felt warm with excitement. For once, I wasn't just tagging along on someone else's story. I was part of it. Mom hugged me quickly, almost distracted, and Dad gave his usual stiff pat on the back. Something in the air felt off. They avoided my eyes, their smiles tight and thin. Before I could ask, the front door swung open and Samantha swept in, Ethan trailing behind her. She looked like she was already on vacation. Sunglasses perched on her head, nails freshly done, her suitcase new and shiny. We all sat down for dinner, but the silence was louder than the clink of silverware. I tried to fill it. "I can't believe tomorrow we'll be on a beach instead of here freezing," I said with a little laugh. No one answered. Finally, Samantha set down her glass, clearing her throat in that rehearsed way she always did before an announcement. "We need to talk about the trip." The knot in my stomach tightened. She folded her hands delicately. "The restaurant's been struggling. Numbers aren't where we projected. We've had to make some tough calls." Her eyes flicked to Ethan, then back at me. "And we've decided that, well, the most sensible thing is for you to sit this one out." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Excuse me?" Mom reached across the table, patting Samantha's hand supportively. "Sweetheart, it's just how things worked out. Your sister and Ethan can't afford their share right now. You understand, don't you?" My pulse roared in my ears. "No, I don't understand. I paid my share, every cent." "Yes, well," Samantha said, tilting her head with that condescending smile. "That money will help cover the rest of the expenses. We couldn't possibly cancel on everyone else." The words landed like stones. "My money?" My voice cracked, louder this time. Dad wouldn't meet my gaze. He stared down at his plate as if the roast chicken held the answers to the universe. "Madison." Mom's tone snapped like a whip. "Family helps family. Samantha and Ethan are in a rough patch. You can afford to be understanding." Understanding. That word again. Always meaning I had to sacrifice, and Samantha got to shine. I looked from one face to another, waiting for someone, anyone, to back me up. But they were united, just like always. Mom soothing, Dad silent, Samantha smug, Ethan conveniently mute. My chest burned. So let me get this straight. I work double shifts for months, save every penny, skip meals, just so you can take my money and leave me behind? Samantha gave a tiny shrug. "It's not personal, Maddie. We just never had a proper honeymoon, and this way, everyone still gets to enjoy the trip. Well, almost everyone." Her laugh was soft, almost pitying, but sharp enough to cut. No one defended me. No one even flinched. The room blurred as hot tears stung my eyes, but I forced myself not to let them fall. I swallowed, shoved back my chair, and stood. The scrape of wood against tile was the only sound as I left the table. Upstairs in my childhood bedroom, I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Grandpa's stars. They blurred through the haze of tears until all I could see was betrayal. Tomorrow they'd fly to Hawaii with my money. Tomorrow they'd smile for photos and toast champagne while I sat here, alone. And in that moment, beneath those fading stars, I knew something had broken that could never be repaired. That night, I lay in my childhood bed, the faint glow of Grandpa's stars staring down at me. The house was quiet, except for muffled laughter drifting up from the kitchen where my family carried on as if they hadn't just stolen my savings and crushed me with a smile. My chest ached, but beneath the ache something else was stirring. Not tears, not surrender, something sharper. I thought of Grandpa Walter's voice on the lake years ago. The best catches aren't always the ones splashing on the surface. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, waiting deep. Maybe I had been quiet too long. By morning, my plan had formed, clear as the frost on the windows. At breakfast, I forced a smile as Mom handed me a list of chores. "You'll water the plants while we're gone, won't you? And don't forget the mail." "Of course," I said brightly. My voice didn't even shake. "Don't worry about a thing." Samantha appeared in the doorway in designer sunglasses, adjusting her scarf like she was already in Honolulu. "We'll send you plenty of photos, Maddie," she teased. "You know, so you don't feel too left out." Her laughter stuck to my skin like tar, but I kept smiling, waving as the taxis rolled away with their luggage stacked neatly in the trunks. Mom leaned out to remind me one last time, "Take care of the house." "I will," I called after them, and I meant it, but not the way they thought. As the cabs turned the corner and disappeared, my smile fell. I grabbed my keys, threw my bag in the backseat of my old Civic, and drove straight to Portsmouth. To my house. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt different. This wasn't a shrine to Samantha's success. It was Grandpa's legacy, my inheritance. Yet everywhere I looked, their presence polluted it. Samantha's blazers lined the closet where Grandpa's suits had once hung. Ethan's framed wine reviews replaced Grandpa's fishing photos. Even the living room mantel, where our chessboard used to rest, was now covered in their wedding portraits. My stomach clenched. They had already begun erasing him. And me. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my phone and called the first moving company I found online. "Christmas Eve service? Triple rate," the man on the line warned. "Fine, just get here today," I snapped. By afternoon, boxes and bags lined the curb. Samantha's shoes, Ethan's tailored suits, their overpriced cookware, all packed neatly and carried out. Watching strangers remove every trace of them felt like stripping poison from a wound. In Grandpa's study, I found their important documents stacked carelessly in a drawer. I packed those too, sealing them away in a box marked with their names. No detail would be left undone. The movers left, muttering holiday wishes, their truck rumbling away with the life Samantha and Ethan thought they owned. Next, I called a locksmith. "Christmas Eve, huh?" he said, shaking his head as he got to work. "Yeah," I replied, watching cold air fog from my lips. Better late than never. Within an hour, every lock was replaced. My keys, only mine, clicked satisfyingly in the new bolts. When the last door shut behind him, I stood in the silence, my silence, breathing in the scent of old wood and salt air. For the first time in years, the house felt like it belonged to me again. Driving back to Boston that evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. At the dorm, Lisa handed me a cup of hot chocolate as the orphan Christmas party kicked off around us. Students without anywhere to go laughed, music played, and for once I didn't feel like the loneliest person in the room. "Thought you'd be in Hawaii by now," she said. I sipped the cocoa, letting its warmth spread through me. "Change of plans," I answered, a smile tugging at my lips. They could drink champagne under palm trees with my money. They could laugh in hotel lobbies and pose for sunset photos, but they wouldn't be laughing when they came home, because for the first time in my life, I hadn't stayed quiet, and this time, I wasn't going to. While the rest of Boston huddled against December winds, my phone lit up with photos drenched in sunlight. Samantha had wasted no time flooding social media with every detail of their dream vacation. The first post hit my feed Christmas morning. Her in a designer bikini, cocktail in hand, captioned, "Living our best life, Mahalo, Hawaii." The next showed Ethan attempting to surf, Mom and Dad laughing from the shore, their skin already bronzed from just one day under the Pacific sun. Each ping of my phone felt like a jab. They weren't just enjoying themselves, they were rubbing it in, deliberately or not. But the strangest part? Instead of crumbling, I found myself smiling. I sat cross-legged on the dorm floor, surrounded by friends at our so-called orphan Christmas, a gathering for students who couldn't or didn't want to go home. Lisa had strung twinkle lights across the common room, and someone passed around mugs of cheap hot chocolate topped with mini marshmallows. It wasn't glamorous, but it was warm, real. "Thought you'd be sipping piña coladas on the beach right now," one of my classmates teased, nudging me with his elbow. "Change of plans," I said, raising my mug. "Turns out this is exactly where I need to be." And I meant it. The days that followed only widened the contrast. My feed became a travel brochure of their extravagance, infinity pools glinting under Hawaiian sunsets, luau dinners with whole roasted pigs, Ethan raising a glass of champagne beside Samantha, while the caption read, "Making memories with the people who matter most." That one stung the most. People who matter most. The message beneath the words was clear enough. I didn't make the cut. I turned the phone face down and let the laughter around me drown out the buzzing. New Year's Eve came. Samantha posted a video of fireworks exploding over Waikiki Beach, her arm hooked through Ethan's, Mom and Dad cheering behind them. She wrote, "Sometimes you have to step back from work and enjoy life. Here's to family and fresh beginnings." Family. The word tasted sour now. I slipped out of the dorm lounge, stepping into the cold hallway where silence pressed against me. I leaned against the wall, eyes closed, and let the tears finally fall, not out of weakness, but out of clarity. They had taken my money, my place, my trust. But they couldn't touch what I had done in Portsmouth. They didn't know yet that the locks were changed, their belongings boxed and gone. They didn't know the house wasn't theirs to walk back into. And that secret was my strength. When I returned to the lounge, Lisa handed me a sparkler. "Come on, Maddie. Midnight's in 5. I lit it, watching sparks fly, and for the first time in months, I felt free. As the countdown hit 0, my phone buzzed again. Another photo of Samantha and Ethan clinking glasses on some rooftop. I didn't even open it. Instead, I held my sparkler high and whispered to myself, This year, it's different. This year, I'm not the quiet one anymore. The snow had turned gray along the Boston sidewalks when their black SUV pulled into the driveway. I watched from across the street, breath fogging the air, heart steady. For weeks, I had replayed this moment in my mind, and now it was here. Samantha was the first out, her designer luggage rolling behind her like a trophy. Ethan followed, still tan from the Hawaiian sun, Mom and Dad trailing with tired smiles. Then the key fumbled in the lock. I could almost hear the confusion before the sound reached me, the click of metal against metal, then silence. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, jiggling the knob. He tried again, harder. The door didn't budge. "Ethan, stop yanking it!" Samantha snapped, pulling off her sunglasses. "Maybe the lock froze?" Dad stepped forward, his voice sharp. "That's not the right key." I crossed the street slowly, letting my boots crunch the snow. "It's the right key," I said, voice calm. "The lock just doesn't belong to you anymore." Their heads whipped toward me. "Madison?" Mom's voice cracked, half disbelief, half fury. "Hi, Mom," I said evenly, clutching the folder of documents in my arm. "Hope you enjoyed the trip." Ethan's face darkened. "What did you do?" "What I had to." I handed him the eviction notice, my fingers steady though my chest burned. "Walter left the house to me. I changed the locks before you could spend another dime of his money." For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by Samantha's sharp laugh. "You can't be serious. This is a joke." "It's not." My voice was low, certain. "It's legal. Every paper is signed, every right transferred. You knew Granddad trusted me. You just thought you could push me aside." Mom lunged forward, snatching the folder, flipping pages as her hands shook. "No, this can't be. He wouldn't—" Her voice faltered, the truth staring back at her in black ink. Dad's jaw clenched. "You little ungrateful— Ungrateful?" My anger finally broke through, hot and sharp. "You drained me dry for years. My savings, my time, my loyalty. And then you left me behind while you toasted to family on a beach I helped pay for. Tell me, who's ungrateful here?" Ethan's fist hit the doorframe, making the wood rattle. "You won't get away with this!" "I already have," I whispered, more to myself than to him. The neighbors had begun peeking through curtains, drawn by the shouting. Samantha noticed first, her face flushing as whispers traveled down the street. She hissed, "This is humiliating. We can't stand here like beggars." Dad barked, "Shut up, Samantha!" But his voice cracked, desperate, defeated. I tightened my scarf, suddenly feeling the cold less. "You should go. Hotels still take credit cards, don't they?" Their glares burned holes in me, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent too many nights crying over their cruelty. Now I stood rooted, unshaken. Mom's eyes were wet, her voice sharp with venom. "You'll regret this, Madison. Family always finds a way back." "Maybe," I said softly. "But not this family. Not anymore." I turned away, their voices rising behind me. Rage, panic, disbelief, all blending into a storm I no longer had to weather. The snow crunched under my boots, and for the first time in years, it sounded like freedom. The wind cut sharp as a knife, but none of us seemed to notice anymore. We stood in the driveway, breath visible, hearts thundering louder than the traffic on the distant street. I hadn't planned to linger, but their faces, angry, shocked, unraveling, pulled the words out of me. Ethan stepped closer, eyes wild. "You think this makes you powerful, don't you? Locking us out, humiliating your own family?" "Family?" My laugh came brittle. "When was the last time you treated me like family? Was it when you left me behind for Hawaii? Or when you told everyone I was too ordinary to matter?" Mom's voice sliced through. "We raised you, Madison. Fed you, clothed you." "You used me," I shot back. "Every chore, every errand, every sacrifice. You piled it on me like I was nothing but your unpaid servant. And when Walter gave me the one thing you couldn't touch, you tried to steal even that." Samantha threw up her hands, mascara smudged from her furious tears. God, listen to yourself. You sound pathetic, crying about chores, about not going on one trip. Grow up! I locked eyes with her, steady, the heat rising in my chest. Pathetic? You've never worked a real day in your life. You wouldn't last a week outside Dad's credit card limit. I built something from scratch while you sipped cocktails on a beach I helped fund. Her face flushed scarlet, but before she could spit back, Dad's voice boomed, "Enough! You're tearing this family apart!" The words struck me harder than I expected. For a second, my throat tightened. Then I whispered, "No, Dad, you already did, the moment you chose greed over love." Silence fell, heavy and raw. Their glares flickered, but beneath it I saw something else. Fear. They realized I wasn't bending, not anymore. Ethan broke it, voice cracking with fury. "This house, this money, it was never meant for you. You tricked Walter somehow. You manipulated him." "I didn't have to," I said softly, pain threading through the calm. "He saw me. He saw who I really was, while the rest of you looked right through me." Mom shook her head violently, her pearls rattling against her collar. "We won't let this stand. We'll fight you in court. We'll drag your name through the mud if we have to." "Do it," I whispered, stepping forward until I was inches from her. "Every document is airtight. Every word is legal. And every neighbor watching right now knows exactly who abandoned me and who came crawling back." I gestured subtly at the windows across the street. Curtains twitched. Whispers spread. Samantha wrapped her arms around herself, finally aware of the eyes burning into them. For the first time, Dad faltered. His shoulders slumped. A man who'd built his life on control and was watching it slip through his fingers. "Madison." His voice was barely audible. "Don't do this." "I'm not the one doing this," I said, my voice breaking, not from weakness but release. "You did this the moment you chose cruelty over kindness. I'm just finally choosing myself." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I wanted them to see strength, not scars. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he had no words left. Samantha muttered something under her breath, venomous but shaky. Mom looked away, as if the sight of me standing tall was too much to bear. The storm had raged, the fury unleashed, but now silence swallowed us again. And in that silence, I realized something. I no longer needed their approval, their affection, or their apologies. I turned toward the streetlight, glowing pale against the snow. "Goodbye," I said, the single word cutting final, and I walked away, each step echoing like a door closing behind me, for good. Snow had melted into spring, and spring had long since surrendered to another winter. A full year had slipped by, but for me, it felt more like a lifetime. I stood in the small cafe I now owned, sunlight spilling through the wide front windows onto polished wooden tables. The air smelled of roasted beans and warm bread, the kind of scent that drew strangers in and made them linger like old friends. Behind the counter, a young barista laughed as she frothed milk, her easy joy reminding me of the girl I once was, quiet, invisible, except now, I wasn't her anymore. A bell chimed as the door swung open. It wasn't family this time, just a couple with 2 little kids, cheeks red from the cold. They stomped snow from their boots, ordered cocoa, and settled into a corner booth. Watching them, I felt a warmth in my chest. Not envy, not longing, but peace. "Madison," a voice called. It was Claire, one of the regulars, handing me her empty cup with a smile. "This place feels like home, you know that? You've given this neighborhood something special." I smiled back, genuinely. That's the goal. What she didn't know, and what few people did, was how much this cafe meant to me. It wasn't just a business. It was proof. Proof that I could stand on my own, create something out of nothing, and no longer live under the weight of being unwanted. I thought back to the stormy night outside the old house when I had walked away with nothing but pride. They hadn't spoken to me since, not one call, not a single letter. At first, that silence hurt like a fresh wound, but over time I realized it was also freedom. My husband Daniel walked in from the back kitchen, wiping flour from his hands. He leaned down to kiss my forehead before heading toward a tray of pastries cooling on the rack. He didn't have to say a word. His presence was steady, grounding. After everything, I had built not only a business, but also a partnership built on respect, not exploitation. "Madison," Daniel called softly, "don't forget, we're visiting the community center later. They asked if you'd speak again to the young women's group." Right. The mentorship program. Something I'd started months back, helping girls who felt overlooked, girls who reminded me of myself. "I won't forget," I said, my voice firmer now. Because how could I? Sharing my story, watching their eyes widen with recognition, had become one of the most healing parts of my journey. As the cafe buzzed with chatter, I caught my reflection in the window. My face looked older, perhaps, but there was a light in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't haunted anymore. I wasn't waiting for their approval. The doorbell jingled again. For half a heartbeat, I thought it might be them, my family. But it wasn't. It was just another stranger, another story waiting to cross paths with mine. And that was enough. If you had told me a year ago that I would be here, standing in my own cafe, living a life I built with my own two hands, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I thought survival meant clinging to people who kept breaking me. I thought love had to be earned through sacrifice, through silence, through being small enough to fit into someone else's shadow. But I was wrong. What I've learned is this. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people you meet along the way who choose to see you, who choose to stand beside you without conditions. Strength doesn't come from being loud or ruthless. It comes from knowing when to walk away, when to protect your own worth. To anyone listening who feels invisible, abandoned, or betrayed, I want you to know this. You are not powerless. You are not defined by the people who failed to love you. You get to write your own story, even if that means starting from scratch. And if my journey spoke to you, please hit like, subscribe, share this story, and leave your thoughts below. Let's keep reminding each other that resilience is real and no one is ever truly alone.